Hi, folks. This is Abel James, and thanks so much for tuning in to Fat Burning Man, where we talk about real food, real results, and cool lifestyle hacks you can use to be smarter and leaner and healthier than ever. On the show this week, I'm very happy to welcome back someone you guys have been asking about for a long time. I had him on the show earlier, but it's been far too long. He's the best-selling author of The 4-Hour Workweek and many other books that you may or may not have read. He's, of course, Mr. Tim Ferriss, and I think you guys are really going to enjoy this show. We get into a lot of stuff. You might at times feel like this show is going twice the speed as normal, and that may or may not have something to do with the fact that Tim right now is experimenting with ketosis, and his brain is on fire. So we'll get to that in a second. Firstly, you may know that I just launched my hardcover book called The Wild Diet, and it's been getting some great reviews. I thought I might share one with you before we get to the show. This one is 5 stars, More Than Recipes by Michael Wesselson. Thank you, Michael. I bought this book after listening to Abel's Fat Burning Man podcast for months. Abel takes a practical and positive approach to eating well and exercise. I've lost 3 inches in my waist from following his simple plan for 3 months. Not bad. I look better and feel fantastic. I decided to buy the Wild Diet book so I could explore new and different recipes and stay true to my new way of eating. There's a lot more than recipes in this book, and I enjoyed having extra information on why this diet works and why traditional American eating and dieting does not. It is especially useful to have this resource because so many friends and family want to know what I've done to lose weight and look so good. Thank you, Abel. Well, thank you, Michael. So if you haven't yet grabbed a copy of my new book, The Wild Diet, please check it out anywhere books are sold. You can also, of course, go to fatburningman.com and check it out there. If you're already enjoying your copy of The Wild Diet, please take a quick minute to leave a review on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Apple iBooks, Goodreads, or anywhere else you can. Your reviews and feedback really do help support this free show and the other cool stuff that we bring for you guys. And I read every piece of feedback I get. So thank you very much in advance. And thanks to those of you who have already left a review and grabbed your copy. All right, so on to the show with Tim. We talk about how to get started with ketosis and witness firsthand what it does to Tim's brain, the daily habits and hacks that you can use to be 10 times more effective, why Tim isn't doing intense CrossFit type exercise right now, and how to heal from Lyme disease, something that my brother got and Tim has experienced recently. It's something that you may have heard about or even experienced firsthand. So we talk about the trials and terrors of going through something that is an ephemeral condition, especially here in America, and what Tim did about it and how he's still kind of leveling up to this day. So one quick note about this show. This is the first time I've recorded a show completely off the grid. Right now we're up in the mountains by Santa Fe and we're running on solar and cellular. So the connection at times was a little bit scratchy, but I'd say it's a really, really promising start. And I've been impressed with the fact that we can be in totally remote places and still bring the show to you. So I appreciate you bearing with us if there is a little hiccup here and there, but I think you're really going to enjoy this show with Tim. So let's go hang out with him. All right, folks, he is the best-selling author of The 4-Hour Workweek, The 4-Hour Body, and The 4-Hour Chef. As the master of space and time, he's also got a brand spanking new podcast and TV show. I'm very happy to welcome back Mr. Tim Ferriss. What's cooking, Tim?
What is cooking? Not much, because I've been fasting and consuming synthetic ketones. So I'm not doing a whole hell of a lot of cooking these days, but a lot is happening. And I'm very excited about it. So awesome. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, so we haven't talked in a while, but I did listen to your show with Arnold Schwarzenegger, which was one of my favorite episodes of all time, of anything. And man, that must have been such a pleasure to sit down with that man.
It was surreal, to put it mildly.
Right.
And what was really funny about it is typically if you try to get someone in person, they punt to phone. And then I tried to get Arnold. I pitched doing something via phone, and the response that came back from his team was, we think it would be a lot more interesting in person. Would you be able to make in person? And I was I think I can somehow fit that into my schedule. Yes, I'll call my other commitments. And ended up, walking in past all the security and sitting down at his breakfast table to do the podcast, which was just insane. And I was so nervous.
Yeah.
Understandably, I don't get terribly starstruck often, but
it's the Terminator.
It's Arnold Schwarzenegger, for Christ's sake. So I didn't sleep at all the night before. I had my assistant and multiple people calling my phone to make sure I was up.
Wow.
And 3 alarms set on my iPhone, and got in. But I did a ton of research and really tried to dig and pull out stories that people hadn't heard before, including even his own team. And that was a blast. So
Yeah.
I was very happy with how that turned out, and it's developed into a lot more. So I've been now involved ongoing with Arnold and his team, doing
Nice.
all sorts of stuff for after school programs and whatnot. So who would have imagined?
Yeah.
And as a child of the '80s who grew up with Predator and Commando and whatnot, it's very few things could be more surreal.
Yeah,
But that was a blast of an interview for sure.
That's so cool. And all the people in Predator became politicians somehow.
That's so true, Jesse Ventura. Oh my
Still
God,
waiting
that's
on
so
Apollo
funny.
Creed, I guess.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, the legislators and running out of candidates, so they're going shopping in '80s action films.
Totally.
Who can we pick up?
So I've been getting a lot of questions recently, especially about ketosis and especially going high fat, fasting, kind of combining those different worlds. That's something that I've been tinkering with for a long time and just loving it in a lot of ways. You can definitely stub your toes, but why don't you talk about it? Because those are some of your experiments these days, right?
Oh, definitely. And I might have some questions for you as well.
Okay.
And because, well, for instance, I mean, this morning I woke up, and what I'm doing right now, I fasted for a period of time to kickstart ketosis. Just makes it a lot easier and faster for me to do that, to approach it that way. And then this morning had 2 or 3 tablespoons of caprylic acid, which is basically a medium chain triglyceride that converts well to ketones.
Yeah.
The Perillo brand, for anyone who's interested, I have no affiliation, but they sell, I think it's called something like cap oil or cap tree oil, something like that.
Cool.
And then had a spoonful of this stuff, which is Keto Sports calcium and sodium beta hydroxybutyrate. I don't know if you've ever seen
Sounds
this.
delicious.
It is actually not that bad.
Yeah.
You would expect it to be horrible. The label is Keto Kana, CANA, which stands for calcium and sodium. And for those people wondering what the hell beta hydroxybutyrate is, it is what a ketone strip measures if you're measuring ketones through the blood. So you have beta hydroxybutyrate, you have acetoacetate in the urine, so if you're peeing on keto sticks, and then acetone through the breath if you're using something like a ketonics meter. But the blood tells the story, generally speaking, much more accurately in my experience, or at least for me. So I track the beta hydroxybutyrate. And with this, you're basically just jacking your ketone levels up, which of course your brain and your heart really enjoys. So this is my equivalent of coffee prior to you and I talking. And then of course I wouldn't miss having my morning brew of tea, which is just pu'er tea plus ginger and turmeric and just a dash of green tea. Since the pharmacokinetics are slightly different, you get a more extended 15% gain as opposed to flying high and then crashing, as I often do with, say, coffee. But the degree to which I crash on coffee depends almost entirely on how roasted it is, which a lot of people don't realize can be a major factor. But that is basically my morning repertoire at the moment. And one thing I have noticed, though, whether it's at the beginning of a fast or the beginning of ketosis, oftentimes the same thing. For the first week or so of ketosis, I have incredible trouble sleeping. And I'm wondering if you've experienced that or heard of that. I haven't dug very hard because I just assumed it was other factors, but it's so consistent for me. Is that something that you've run into?
I have, yeah. And it's different for everyone, but basically the general answer is that when you hard shift into anything, your body freaks out a little bit. Even if you go off sugar, for a week and you've been eating plenty of it for a while, it's like your body's like, what is going on? And you feel terrible, right? So it's kind of like the carb flu in a lot of ways, which you might have even if you're not a sugar junkie or something like that. So when you go, let me ask you this, why are you doing this right now?
That is the meta question, the good question. I'm doing it right now, experimenting with these two things, partially out of curiosity because I have better tools available to me than when I did these experiments a long time ago. So I have done experiments with extended ketosis, intermittent ketosis, meaning cyclical ketogenic diets where I would do what some people would think of as glycogen depletion workouts with weight training and then carb load for 1 or 2 days, typically 1 day in my case.
Just had a
I've
show
done all
about
that. Yeah, I've done these experiments, but when I did them, which was a long time ago, more than 10 years ago, I didn't have, say, a Precision Extra glucometer from Abbott that also tests ketones.
Yeah.
It was all keto sticks, which is very, very, I mean, that's like, trying to hit a target 50 feet away with a handgun in your wrong hand with a blindfold on. It's really tough to get precise with that type of tool. Yeah, it's ugly. And now I've got, these synthetic ketones. I've got the devices that give me blood readouts. I have all of these toys and tools. So one reason was curiosity, but primarily after Lyme disease last year, which I kind of scoffed at for a long time because my entire family's had Lyme disease. I'm from Eastern Long Island. Everyone gets Lyme disease. But I was really incapacitated and my immune system was highly compromised. Yeah. So this is a way for me to see if extended ketosis or ketosis in general will correct some of the biomarkers, some of the blood measurements that went really wonky and weird after Lyme disease. So some of my lipids, for instance, just got really out of whack and crazy looking. Yeah. And I have no explanation for that. So I'm curious to see if going into a ketotic state will change that or not. And I've done blood tests before, and I'm going to be doing a whole slew, as you would imagine, of blood tests and urinalysis afterwards to see if that has any impact. Cool. And we shall see. Yeah.
My brother got Lyme disease years ago, and the doctors basically denied that was a thing for the first 2 years. And so,
that's not good.
No, it's not. And so by the time they got to it and admitted that was probably the problem, he was so far gone. He had trouble remembering even phone numbers, like digits in consecutive orders, getting neurological. And so, it's something that you don't want to tinker around with. Actually, one of my other friends, he got Lyme disease, the early stages of it, and he walked into, he works in natural foods and supplements and stuff like that. That's what he does. Mm-hmm. And so he walks in a health food store to get the natural solution to it. And the guy behind the counter, he's like, look at my hand. And if you're on the video version, you can see this, but if you're not, I'm shaking it violently. And he looks at his hand and he's just like, I went natural and I made a mistake. And it's crazy. Wow. So what did you do to nip it in the bud?
So this is a very controversial topic, needless to say. I'm sure you've seen this. I do think so. Speaking as someone who was basically destroyed by Lyme disease for a 6-month period, where I had very similar neurological symptoms. I was having trouble remembering close friends' names. My knees were so swollen at one point that I had trouble getting out of bed. It took me about 5 minutes to get up and walking around in the morning. And partially because I didn't exhibit the telltale bullseye rash that a lot of people think of as the trademark, including myself. I'd thought of it as the sort of one of the sole indicators of early onset Lyme. But about 20%, as I understand it, of people are asymptomatic. Topically, you don't get a rash. And I didn't get a rash, so I was just like, suck it up, walk it off, Ferriss. You're not drinking enough coffee, you're not sleeping enough. Yeah. I made up all of these other excuses for the collection of symptoms. I do think that most cases of Lyme disease are misdiagnosed or psychosomatic. And what I mean by that is Lyme is a collection of symptoms for the purposes of diagnosis is very similar to, say, chronic depression or chronic fatigue, or even many other diseases and syndromes that have extreme overlap with the symptoms. So I think that and for instance, when I went to one of the top doctors at Stanford and I told him that, I've been diagnosed with Lyme disease, and his first response was, okay, where did you get Lyme disease? And he looked on the CDC, Center for Disease Control map, because he's so accustomed to having old retired dudes or bored housewives in Palo Alto come in and say, I have Lyme disease. And he's been so accustomed to debunking that diagnosis that he looked on the CDC map and he's like, okay, you're pretty much at ground zero for deer ticks. Let's talk. And the way that I nipped it in the bud is the conventional approach. And after looking at everything, and this is probably going to piss off a lot of people, but I've dug I've really dug into this, as you would imagine I would. And I have access to a lot of incredibly good doctors and biochemists and microbiologists and infectious disease specialists. I have a number of concierge docs at the moment, and that's not something I've always had, but I have a concierge doc right now who used to run the infectious disease department for one of the top universities in the country.
Yeah.
And none of those people believe in the idea of chronic Lyme disease. Mm-hmm. They don't. If you destroy it using antibiotics, whether that's any number of broad spectrum or specific antibiotics administered orally or intravenously, there's very little to zero evidence to support the contention that the spirochete survives that onslaught of antibiotics.
Yeah.
There's very little evidence. So my theory, I used antibiotics, doxycycline specifically. Now, those are powerful drugs. So my pet theory is that the chronic symptoms that people experience that they attribute to chronic Lyme disease are not from the Lyme bacteria or bacterium itself. Mm-hmm. It is from the gut flora depletion that it comes after a long stint of using antibiotics.
Right.
And what I've been amazed by, quite frankly, I'm really familiar with the microbiome, and I have access to very good startups. I'm an investor in a company called Ubiome with a U, which does this type of testing. And I've been fascinated to see how hard it is to repopulate your gut. And I've been doing obviously not while I'm ketosis, but the kombucha strains, the like L plantarum, all of the probiotics, but not just the probiotics. That's not enough, because those will just pass through your system if your GI tract doesn't have the environment to host good bacteria. So I'm taking prebiotics, the baobab root, the inulin, the different types of insoluble fibers, and so on and so forth, and really doing all of it. And my before and after still looks almost identical when I do a GI sort of fecal matter test. Yeah, it's very, very demoralizing. So I suspect that is a huge, huge component with some of the residual problems that I'm having. And so this is part of my detective work. So, hopefully the testing that I'm doing, and there is some evidence to support, although it's also highly speculative. Or I should say incomplete. There's some evidence to support that a ketogenic diet can help. There's the possibility that it could help restore a better balance of bacteria in the gut. So I want to, and keeping in mind, like I've done slow carb diet, very similar obviously to paleo with legumes and so on added in for a very, very long time. And so I'm not a high carb necessarily eater. I'm certainly not eating the standard American diet. Yeah. And, there's a case to be made, in fact, for beans and legumes as prebiotics, just given the starch that's involved. But so I've been following a very healthy diet, but my blood tests got really majorly out of whack after the Lyme and then the antibiotics. So that's a very, very, very long answer, but that's why I'm doing these experiments. And my belief, based on all the evidence so far, is that antibiotics do work at killing the Lyme spirochete, and that, and my pet theory subsequent to that. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, you're dealing with like napalm. I mean, it's not, this is not a sniper shot. Like, you take broad spectrum antibiotics, you're just basically swallowing napalm and killing whatever's in there. Yeah. So, but I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic because when people say, "Oh, it's chronic Lyme, we don't know how to treat it," like the spirochete is digging into the biofilm and hiding, and I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, you're infested with thetans? Like, this is science fiction, folks. Like, this is just pure fantasy land. Yeah. And, it's not some malevolent, like, sentient being that's like, okay, like, let's gather the troops and hide in this tissue because we know the antibiotics are coming. Like, this is not how these things work. So I've actually been, in a way, oddly reaffirmed and excited about the fact that I don't think there is a chronic spirochete activity. I think it's almost certainly related to microbiome depletion. And then so now the question is like, well, and I forget if I can curse on this show or not,
We'll
but it's
bleep
like
it, Tim.
from Long Island, it's hard to keep inside of me, especially with this topic because it pisses me off so much, so many levels. I'm really now it's just a question of testing with the microbiome. So I'm doing a ton of that, and I'll be announcing a lot more of that stuff as I try to figure stuff out.
Yeah.
But the other thing I would say to people out there, just to be really clear, the tests that are used for testing Lyme disease are very primitive. So you get a lot of false positives, meaning you test positive for Lyme disease when you don't have it, and you get a lot of false negatives, meaning you test negative when in fact you do have it.
Yeah.
And whether that's the ELISA, the Western blot, or otherwise. And there are labs out there, I'm not going to mention any names because I don't want to get anyone in legal trouble, but labs that specialize exclusively in Lyme disease are incentivized to give you answers that require further testing. And I've seen some really scandalous, horribly malevolent, in my opinion, behavior from a lot of these labs, which are very well known in the Lyme communities. And most rigorous docs and scientists think those places are just charlatan shops. So
cool. So one of the things I'm really fascinated by aren't what people write in their books, because I know that anyone can write anything in books, especially being an author now. But what do you do every day, especially considering, you're launching, you're busy. How do you keep up with all the knowledge that's in your head and reconcile that with like actually having zero to little time in a lot of cases to do the things that you should?
Definitely. It's a constant challenge. And the reason I say it's a constant challenge, and I do have some answers, but it's a constant challenge because once you create slack, let's just say, once you create a buffer where you have improved a process, or you've divested yourself of an activity, or ended a relationship that was very time and energy consuming. Once you have that new capacity, if you're a type A personality and very hyper aggressive, and I would say that I'm in that boat, you're in that boat, I'm like, sweet, look at all this free time I can now use for something else. And you very quickly fill that void. And it doesn't have to be with work stuff, but it could just be with commitments of various types. Right. So in my particular case, there are a few things that allow me to operate well. And if I do these things every day, and I'm fallible, I still will have days where, for instance, I can't sleep well, and so I'll wake up later than expected. That's and I am a night owl. Historically, I go to bed 4 or 5 and wake up very late. I mean, like noon,
really?
1 o'clock. If I'm writing. So I get my best writing done between 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. And
Twilight
that means
hours,
right. Which makes sense. And it's actually very common for writers. It's not all across the board the case, but for writers to get the most done when everyone else is asleep, which makes perfect sense. So you can either go to bed very late, which is what it has been historically what I do, or you can wake up very, very early.
Yeah, I do the morning one.
Right. So what I have realized is if I wake up, I don't have to wake up at the crack of dawn, but if I wake up around 7:30, 7 or 7:30, that gives me a good hour to hour and a half, at least particularly on the East Coast, but even on the West Coast, where I feel like I've gotten a start on the day. So just psychologically and emotionally, I don't feel rushed. I don't feel like I got out of bed and someone dropped me on a treadmill running at like 10 miles an hour, which is the feeling that you can have, which is very reactive. If you wake up late and have to jump into, say, email, and you're like, oh my God, you refresh the screen, and I'm sure everyone's done this. You refresh the screen and you look at the total number of email count and you're just like, and you wait, and then it hits and you're like, oh my God. So the first thing would be waking up between 7:30, let's say. The second would be meditating for 20 minutes first thing in the morning before I check text messages, before I check any type of medium that could dictate my schedule or interrupt my schedule.
That part is epic, life-changing right there.
Yeah, huge. And there are many different ways to do it. You could use an app like Headspace or Calm. I don't use an app. I tend to just sit down and meditate using techniques from transcendental meditation. I don't think it makes that much of a difference, quite frankly. And TM, to take a course, which I recommend, or classes, let's say a 4 to 5 day class, which is an hour a day at like lunch break.
Mm-hmm.
I found it very helpful because I was accountable to someone else.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized that historically, if I weren't accountable to someone else to meditate and record that experience and discuss that experience, I wouldn't do it consistently. It's just too optional an activity. So TM, it's just tm.org, was very helpful for me. There are things that I disagree with in terms of just how the organization is run, but it's very secular. They do have like the Indian guru thing that you have to get past in the beginning, and you're like, all right, I got it. Like, I've seen the picture of your dude. Like, let's get to the technical, meat and potatoes. But it's just repeating a sound, a mantra. I don't like that word. I think it has a lot of weird connotations, but just repeating a sound. And that allows you to basically turn off the monkey mind by like introducing a type of organized static. That's how I think about it. So it's basically a warm bath for your brain where you just chill out and stop the chatter for a brief period of time. And Vipassana meditation, I think, is also very helpful. Different types of mindfulness meditation. I think there's a book called Wherever You Go, There You Are by John Kabat-Zinn, which I think is very helpful. There's another one by Thich Nhat Hanh, his first book, who was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Mindfulness is Every Step, or something like that. And those are two very good intro books, in my opinion. But if you're like, you know what, too much work, I don't need more homework assignments, just try guided meditation, Headspace, Calm. Sam Harris, who's a good buddy of mine, he was also on the podcast, PhD in neuroscience. He also has some guided meditations of his own on samharris.org. So HARRIS. Brilliant guy. So those are two pieces. The last would be some type of movement practice. And when I say movement practice, I'm very deliberately not saying exercise, because it doesn't have to be a workout, but some type of physical movement, ideally outdoors. So my instrument of choice is long walks, and which help tremendously for deepening ketosis, as a side note. But long walks. I'm not doing necessarily anything like a CrossFit workout, particularly since I'm just getting kind of back on my feet after all of these autoimmune issues, and the really super like head against a wall, smashing through bricks approach to exercise, I've in my older years just realized I don't think it's necessary. I don't think it's necessary, and so, I'll still do that stuff on occasion, but right now it's not my mode. I'll go for like a 2-3 hour walk, and I'll batch my phone calls or listening to podcasts that I either listening to for relaxation or because I want to figure out like, how are they doing sponsor reads in a way that isn't annoying? How are they doing A, B, C, D, or D? Like, are they choosing pre-roll, mid-roll, post-roll, whatever? I'm in research phase with all that stuff because I've been very fortunate with the Tim Ferriss show's done.
It's done really well.
Yeah, it's been absurd, and I started it as an experiment where I was like, all right, you know what? And this is for those people listening, to tie it back to your question, like, how do you make things work? I make things work by partially taking new projects and mitigating the fear associated with them. And the way I do that is I take something that people might view as a permanent decision, quitting a job, starting a company, whatever it might be. And in the case of podcasts, a lot of people start a podcast, but they don't have any exit strategy.
Right.
So in other words, they're like, hey, I should do a podcast. But I like to think about it almost as a sort of a poker player might. And, that was one of the skills that I did in the TV show. I had a week I'd never played poker, and I had a week to try to learn enough to compete against professional poker players for my own money, like thousands of dollars at the end of the week. But so deciding in advance, like, when am I going to walk? Right. And if you buy a stock in stock market, same thing. Like, what is my exit point? Yeah. So for me, I established that with the podcast, I was like, I'll do a 6-episode experiment, and it's going to be self-contained. I'll try it. If I don't like it, I'm going to end at 6. And I decided that in advance. So I knew that the total amount of work was very clearly defined and contained. Yeah. And then I tried it, and I was like, hey, this is actually really fun, and I'm having a good time with it. So I kept doing it. Yeah. But, I treat almost everything in my life as a series of 2-week experiments, like 2 to 4 week experiments. And there are set points to reassess things. And I think that's very smart, much in the same way that some people I know, and granted, I'm in San Francisco, so I'm surrounded by all sorts of weirdness, but some people I know renew their wedding vows every year, and they sit down to like talk about it and basically do like a performance review of each other. And I met with this one guy. I've been trying to spend a lot more time these days with really happy 60 and 70-year-old men, because I'm a dude, just 60 and 70-year-old men who have very good relationships with, whether it be, their wife, their kids.
Hang out with my dad.
But seriously, like just interrogating those people because it's not common. I mean, I at least in the metropolitan cities in which I've lived, I mean, most people are pretty unhappy, and most people have marriages that are really, really rocky. And not to say they don't take work regardless, but it's very challenging. I'm just realizing, watching as I am now, and I'm 37, and a lot of my friends are getting divorced, and these are like good, smart people who are benevolent folks. I mean, they're trying to do the right thing. And so I met with one older guy, and we were having drinks, and he said that every quarter, and I thought this was so genius, like and he's a very successful business guy, so this fits his mind perfectly, but every quarter, and I think this was actually his wife's idea, he gets graded on a 10-point scale as a husband, father, provider, and lover.
Wow.
And he gets graded on a 10-point scale for each of those, but they're not evaluated, or he's not judged in each of those independently. So his wife has a total that he has to hit. And that's the most important thing. So, for instance,
he might genius,
isn't that smart? So he'll travel for say 2 months, and he'll be like closing huge deals, and he'll be overseas, and so he'll get a 10 out of 10 on the provider score, or 9 out of 10. But then, as say lover, he's not going to do so hot because he's just not available. Father, maybe, who knows? Husband, maybe, who knows? And I just thought that was so smart, because most people, myself included, like will be involved with projects, whether those are just a relationship with an assistant, or a relationship with a boss, or a relationship with fill in the blank. It could be anything, a creative partner where you're you're making pottery together 3 times a week. And these little problems can fester, just like Lyme disease, and become really, really big problems. So it's like, prophylactically, can you build in these check-in assessment points to not only identify problems, but just optimize for a better experience and a better outcome. So, holy shnikes, these freaking synthetic ketones are really popping right now. That was like an answer to 15 questions that you didn't ask at all, but that's okay.
Ketones work, folks.
Yeah,
they work.
Dude, brains love ketones. Oh my God.
No, but that is so cool, because I think it's important to think of things cyclically. Right? You can't just get like an A+ across the board in everything, right? Like I remember being in high school, and I graduated early. So some terms I would, have to be the lead in a play and get straight A's. Couldn't be on the football team at the same time. You know what I mean? You kind of have to pick your battles as it were, and also look forward to the upcoming battle when you can take your foot off the gas on one thing and really come back refreshed to another.
Definitely. And life is about, I think, investing is a very interesting practice, because investing money is a metaphor for the rest of the assets and resources in your life, because life is really a series of choices about resource allocation. You have energy, you have attention, you have time, you have income, you have mobility, you have all of these various currencies. How do you choose to split them up and allocate them? And what are you optimizing for? That's when people ask me well, what's the optimal diet? I'm like, optimal for what? Because, it's like, hey, if you want to win a bodybuilding competition, I can tell you how you might go about doing that, but it's certainly not gonna, it's certainly, you're not going to like it, almost guaranteed. And it's certainly not going to be optimizing for, say, longevity. There's no way. I mean, your IGF-1, you'll have IGF-1 pouring out your eyeballs. It's not going to be good for longevity purposes.
Right.
But when you're looking at, say, coming back to like my morning routine or my daily routine and how I manage all this stuff, the answer is I don't manage all of it. And I have to let a lot of less important things, including relationships, and I hate to put it this way, but kind of implode on themselves to get the really big positive things done.
Yeah.
And what I've realized is the danger is not so much choosing a bad option. And this is going to sound funny maybe to people, but I think that the danger in a digital world where you're constantly bombarded with information and opportunities and ads and announcements, the biggest risk is not choosing, say, a really terrible job and then staying in a terrible job, because most people will recognize that it is extremely non-desirable to be in that situation, and they'll make a change. The risk is drowning in kind of cool stuff. So you commit to the kind of cool stuff, and that doesn't allow you to commit to the hugely amazing, awesome, life-changing stuff for yourself and other people.
Yeah.
And the analogy that I heard at one point, I didn't create this, but I was told, it's like, well, it's kind of like if you imagine a mason jar, and if you fill it half full of sand, and then you have like a handful of small rocks and you put those in, and then you have two big rocks, you can't fit the two big rocks in. But if you put the two big rocks in, then the handful of smaller rocks, and then fill it full of sand, you can put it all in the jar.
Yeah.
And you have to put first things first. And I think about that because, and again, I can't recall the attribution, but I remember reading at one point, there is no one path to success, but the sure path to failure is trying to please everyone. Yeah. And that's become really clear for me in my own life, because the amount of inbound is hard to fathom. I mean, the Tim Ferriss of 2007, when the 4-Hour Workweek came out, thought he had a lot to juggle and had to figure out systems. Yeah. It is 1/1000th of what comes at me now. So the type of bulletproof shield and the type of sort of parrying and dodging and managing of that has had to become much more sophisticated. Yeah. But more than sophisticated, it's had to become stoic, in the sense that I recognize if someone can't accept that I have too little bandwidth to commit to their project, even if we're friends, and they get very hurt and end up upset with me, that is not a relationship that is worth me maintaining. If they have no compassion and no empathy, no ability to put themselves in my shoes, then it's not a relationship I can invest in. And what's ironic perhaps about that is that I can remember, for instance, back in the day, and this isn't that long ago, I mean, even 2007, where I would say ping someone for a book blurb, and someone I'd had a lot of contact with, and they wouldn't even reply, and I'd be like, wow, how rude. But now I'm like, wow, I get it, because these were people with a lot of public exposure, and I didn't have that at the time. I had a lot of stuff. I mean, I had business I was running remotely and all of this and so on, but I had no conception of how insane it gets when you have a ton of public exposure. Sure. And so, like, I can't even fathom how people, like the Brad Pitts of the world, manage things. It's and I mean, the answer is that, they don't go outside, and they wear like sunglasses and hats and fly private because they can't go to airports. But but the upshot of all of that, I think, is to get the life-changing, huge, positive things done, you have to say no to 1,000 seemingly cool things. Yeah. You can't be like, that could be cool. And that could be cool, let me do it, doesn't scale. Yeah. And not that you have to scale everything, but there's a great little book, I think it's called Anything You Want, I'm blanking on the title, by Derek Sivers, who's a real philosopher king of programming. Yeah. Who's a dear friend. I haven't seen him in too long. I really want to hang out with him. He's been traveling a lot internationally. He built up a company called CD Baby and sold it for, I think, $24 million. And
I used that as a musician years ago. Yeah.
Yeah. So Derek is amazing. And one of his small chapters, this is a phenomenal book. Everybody should buy it. I've read it probably a dozen times, which is saying a lot. I don't read a lot of books once, let alone that many times. And one of the short chapters was on, it basically covered the idea of, if it's not a hell yes, then it should be a no. Yeah. If it's not a hell yes, absolutely, how could I say no to that? If it's like, let me put together a pro and con list for a week and figure it out, then you shouldn't do it. It's a no. Yeah. So anyway, again,
that's a good call.
Ketones taking over my body like a demon. I feel like a demon possessed, I feel like I'm in The Exorcist, but possessed by a benevolent demon called ketones.
It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. Don't worry, nobody listens to this show, but we are coming up on time. Why don't we talk about your show before we go? Tell us about, because you've been holding it close to the chest for a while now. I'm sure you're stoked to get it out there.
Yeah, I'm so excited. So, I mean, for people who, for people who haven't, but also for people who might be familiar with, the 4 Hour Body and the 4 Hour Chef and all the crazy experiments that I did on myself, whether it's, trying to gain 30 pounds of muscle in a month or you name it, right? Trying to hold my breath for multiple minutes with the help of David Blaine. I was basically taking
Ferriss shenanigans
approach to life, which is trying to get trying to get superhuman results without being superhuman. How do you do that, right? How do you renegotiate or negotiate your genetic limits and do things that really shouldn't be possible? Like, what are the hacks? What are the tools and tricks that you can use as a quote normal person to get really absurd results? And I wanted to share this approach to accelerated learning in real time with people. Show them what it looks like. So the show is called the Tim Ferriss Experiment, and part with the production company zero Point Zero, who did all of Anthony Bourdain's work. So they launched No Reservations and Parts Unknown and so on. Very cinematic, very super gritty. And we filmed, this was insane, I wouldn't do it again, 13 episodes in 16 weeks, something like that, where we filmed 5 to 6 days a week. It was just an insane schedule, but each week I would have to tackle a new skill with the help of a very unorthodox world-class teacher. Yeah. And then I would be tested often with something very dangerous at the end of the week. So I had, surfing with Laird Hamilton in Hawaii. I had professional poker. I had 3-gun shooting, which is this crazy kind of real world, like Halo / Call of Duty speed shooting with a 10-time California or national champion. And we did, drumming with Stuart Copeland, who's the founding drummer of the Police, where it was like, in that case, I had a few days to go from zero to playing the drums with Foreigner to a live sold out show. And, I did Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in New York City with Marcelo Garcia, who's like the Michael Jordan of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and had to spar guys who are, just monsters, complete monsters. So I had, torn ligaments, broken bones. This series was insane. But at the point of the whole thing is, each episode delivers at least a handful of techniques that other people can use to learn anything. Cool. There's a language learning episode. It goes on and on and on. And there's a ton of bonus footage. So people can find that on iTunes. So it's just the Tim Ferriss Experiment, Ferriss with 2 R's, 2 S's. And if they want to see bonus footage and all sorts of samples and teasers and tons of extended interviews and stuff, they can just go to 4hourworkweek.com/TV, all spelled out. So that's FOUR, the 4-Hour Workweek. There are a million ways that can be misspelled, I've learned over the years, but 4hourworkweek.com/TV. And I think people will really, really dig it. It's, even if you've never read my stuff, have no idea who I am, if you want to see a combination of like Mythbusters, Jackass, and A Beautiful Mind, then I think this is that show.
That's awesome, man. Well, I can't wait to check it out, and always a pleasure to have you on the show. We'll have to have you on again soon.
Yeah, for sure, man. And I will have some results at that point of all these weird experiments that I'm doing with my protoplasm. So Beautiful. I look forward to it.
Enjoy the ketones.
Thanks, man.